Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. Bigfoot encounters happen to people of all walks of life, but it seems like a large majority of them happen to younger people. More innocent people, children, people who are more open to the possibilities, people who are more willing to believe. And if that is the case, that's something you hear in the paranormal field as well. We often hear of children who see things. They'll see things in the house, things that, mom and dad won't see. And that seems to be the case kind of with Bigfoot encounters. A lot of them happen to younger people. And maybe it's because these creatures or beings or entities or whatever they are can sense that they're not a threat and they're more open to the possibilities. We have to theorize as to why that is, but the story I want to talk about today, this encounter happened back in the early 50s in Washington, and it happened to a 10-year-old boy, and he was on his grandparents' farm, and he ended up encountering a Sasquatch. And shortly after encountering that Sasquatch, he encounters a second one. So he doesn't just have one Sasquatch sighting, he has two within a matter of a couple minutes. And a lot of us, we spend our lives trying to find these things, trying to have one encounter, but it seems when we're out looking, we have the idea in our mind that we want to find one, we want to track them down, we want to see one, get it on video. It never happens for us. We never see it. We'll find trace evidence, we'll find footprints, sometimes fingerprints, we'll record strange noises, but having that visual sighting, it's so elusive to researchers and people who are actually trying to discover these things and get conclusive evidence. But let's get into the encounter, and then afterwards I'll talk more about it. After all these years, I'm not sure just how interesting this account will be to you. However, it left such a lasting impression on me, I've decided to submit this report. I was born in Longview, Washington, and spent much of my childhood exploring the surrounding area with my friends and family. From camping out at Spirit Lake to spending time on my grandparents' farm, it was on their farm that the following incident occurred. Although not a true working farm, as my grandfather worked for the local lumber company in town, they had a large apple orchard, garden, barn, and pasture. Water was provided by a freshwater spring located about 200 yards from the house, down a dark, almost always moist path cut through the surrounding heavy timber. The spring ran all the time, filling a small concrete holding area, which was covered by a small shed-type structure, open on one side. All us grandkids loved to walk down to the spring and sample its cold, fresh water, and also explore the area. On this particular day, while the rest of the family was involved with other things, I decided to take a walk down to the spring. It was a walk I shall never forget. The first 150 to 175 yards of my sojourn were uneventful, except that it was very quiet. Complete silence except for my breathing and muffled footsteps. As I neared the spring, I began to pick up the smell of a skunk, or what I thought was something dead. The path made a turn to the left and went downhill just before it reached the spring. As I made the turn, the spring came up within view along with what I thought was a bear drinking from it. In no time I realized this was no bear. It was a large hair-covered man or ape, and because I was above and kind of to an angle of it, it hadn't seen me yet. I stood very still, and for some reason I was not afraid or feeling threatened. It was squatting down with its upper torso and head bent over the spring. It drank for a while, then raised its head and looked directly in my direction. Then it resumed drinking, having not seen me as I was still perfectly still. I remember hearing my heart pounding and wondering if it could hear it too and give my position away. This observation lasted perhaps 1 to 2 minutes when, from directly behind me, I heard a hee sound, with a whistle sound at the end. The drinking animal immediately stood up. It was 6 to 6.5 feet tall, covered in dark brown to cinnamon-colored hair, about 3 to 4 inches long. It had dark skin on its face and hands, dark eyes set close together, flat nose, large mouth with thin lips, with what I could describe an alarmed look on its face. As I turned to see what had made the noise behind me, I found myself looking at 2 huge legs of a larger animal, perhaps 8 to 9 feet in height. I remember I had to look way up to see his face, as he was on higher ground, and because I was just a kid. Keep in mind that this all happened at once. The sound behind me, the drinking animal standing up, discovering the other animal not 15 to 20 feet behind me. It was time to leave. I immediately ran to my left downhill and through the woods for about 200 feet, then back up to the path. I ran as fast as I could, turning around only once to see if I was being chased. As far as I know, they didn't follow me. I got the feeling they were as surprised as I was. When I told my grandmother what I had seen, she acted very interested. She said something to my grandfather and he became excited. They said I had just seen a couple of local bears that had been hanging around the farm for a while. I'm pretty sure they knew more than they were telling. So this encounter happened in an area where there's a food source, there's an apple orchard, there's a stream, a fresh water supply. It makes sense that they would be there. They probably didn't think anyone was around because everyone was off doing other things. They weren't expecting this 10-year-old boy to be, headed towards them, towards the stream. But he was, and, he walked down to the stream and there the Sasquatch was, a 6-foot tall Sasquatch, estimated to be 6 foot tall, crouched down over the stream, drinking. When you're a kid, everything seems bigger. And when you're in that situation, when you're experiencing something unknown like that, something I would assume would be terrifying, your estimates would probably be a little bit off. But it sounds like whatever Sasquatch he initially seen, it sounds like it was a juvenile, a juvenile male or something along those lines. None of the genitalia or anything like that are described in the encounter. So it seems to be probably a juvenile male, but then he hears something behind him, another one making a strange noise. He turns around and about 15 feet away, 20 feet away, there's another one, but it's much larger. He said it was 9 feet tall. 9 feet tall is huge. Is huge. There's a picture I found online of like a replica short-faced bear that used to exist way back in the day, thousands of years ago, and it's standing up on its hind legs and it's like 12 feet tall. Look at this picture with these people standing beside it. Look how big that is. There's Sasquatch that have been reported to be over 12 feet tall. Is that accurate? I don't know. But 9 feet tall is still pretty big. That's a few feet shorter. When you imagine like a 7 foot tall human, like go on Google and search like a 7 foot tall person or the tallest man that's ever lived. And look how tall they are and how enormous they are. Like compared to an average sized human being. It's wild. 9 feet tall is huge. And just fill in all the blanks too. Like think of the width and all the proportions and all the muscle and everything. And just imagine how massive it would actually be and how scary it would be to run into something like that in the wilderness. Another interesting thing in this case, again, as with many other cases, a strange smell, a strange odor is detected, just before seeing these things. They seem to have a weird smell. Skunky kind of rotting smell. That's usually how it's described. And that happens a lot. And you hear it in a lot of these older cases. I find that nowadays, though, for some reason, in a lot of modern reports, you don't hear that described. And I don't know why that is, but it is a characteristic of a lot of reports. You'll get that strange smell. And that's the case with this story. So the environment that these things were found in is the perfect spot for these things if they're like opportunistic creatures. They have an easy meal. They can sneak into the orchard, grab apples, have a drink, and sneak out. These things might have been coming to that area many times for a long time. Like, nobody knows. If you have a farm or an acreage that's, on the fringes of civilization close to the mountains, if you have a food source like that, like an orchard or a garden, it'd be worth maybe setting up trail cameras or having some way of keeping an eye on, your resources that you have out there, because Sasquatch creatures could be coming in and taking things. You'd never know it. But yeah, this kid got freaked out. He ran off, and supposedly they never followed him. But they didn't seem to be threatened at all by his presence, and that's probably because he was just a kid. And that seems to be the case with a lot of these stories. They won't go out of their way to like escape or run away if there's children around. Sometimes they'll approach them. Sometimes you hear a story about children being taken, going missing in the wilderness. There's a lot of stories like that. But these ones just appeared to be minding their own business. I don't know what the vocalization it made meant. Nobody could ever probably find out, but a lot of times you hear of them making whistling sounds or whooping sounds, but this one's kind of like a weird laughing vocalization. And I don't know about you, but if I heard that in the wilderness, I would be terrified. And I probably would have done the same thing the kid did and tried to run away. But in this story, it kind of shows that you don't have to be 20 kilometers out into the deepest parts of the mountains, like in really remote areas, to encounter these things. You don't even have to be looking for them, because most of the time it seems that they just happen to people who aren't expecting it at all. They just run into them. People are minding their own business and they're having a normal day, and all of a sudden their life changes like that. So yeah, if you live on an acreage or a farm and there's a food source nearby or a water source such as the one described in this encounter, keep a close eye on everything, because you never know what could be sneaking in and taking things. Anyways, it's just another interesting encounter to talk about. And going over all these encounters kind of gives you insight into like the behaviors of these things and how they act and the things that they do. Like, it's kind of interesting to get a bigger picture. The more of these encounters you go through and you read about, the better idea you have as to, how they conduct themselves out in the wilderness, and then that could help you in your research whenever you're out looking for these things. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Mountain Beast Mysteries.